My name is Diane Vance, and I am 36 years old, and I want to tell you about the afternoon my mother's attorney read her will in a conference room in Richmond, Virginia, and left four people who had known Patricia Vance their entire lives sitting in complete silence, trying to understand what they had just heard. My mother died in September after a brief illness that moved faster than anyone expected, and that did not leave time for the specific preparation that longer illnesses allow. She was 67 years old. She had lived in Richmond for the past 22 years, in the house my parents had bought before my father died when I was 15, the house she had stayed in after he was gone, because it was home, and because she was the kind of woman who stayed. We were four children. Gregory was 41, the oldest, who had lived in Richmond closest to our mother, and managed her finances and her household in the practical ways that eldest children in families often manage things when a parent is aging and needs help. I was 36, the one who had been present in the final months as her primary caregiver, the one who had been in the house with her through the illness and who had organized the practical elements of her final weeks. Our younger siblings, Marcus and Beth, were 33 and 30 respectively, both living out of state, both present for the funeral and now present for the reading. Our mother had not been a complicated woman. I want to say that clearly, because the story I am about to tell could suggest otherwise, and I do not believe it does. She had been a school teacher for 30 years. She had been quiet and specific in her preferences and consistent in her habits and genuinely kind in the specific way that some people are kind as a baseline rather than as a performance. She had not been wealthy. Her estate was modest. The house, a retirement account, a small investment account Gregory had helped her manage, the ordinary accumulation of a teacher's life lived carefully across 6 decades. We expected the will to divide those things among the four of us. That was what we expected because that was what she had always implied would happen, in the oblique way that parents imply things about the future without stating them directly. The casual references to someday when the house is yours and the retirement account is something Gregory will handle when the time comes. The attorney's name was Margaret Osai. She had handled our mother's legal affairs for 11 years. She opened the will reading with the standard language and then moved into the specific provisions. There was one provision: the entire estate, the house, the retirement account, the investment account, the personal property, everything was bequeathed to an organization called the Meridian House Foundation. Margaret looked at us over her reading glasses. She said she understood this might be unexpected. She said the bequest was valid, current, and total. She said the Meridian House Foundation was a registered nonprofit in the state of Virginia and that the organization's contact information was in the document. Gregory asked for the address. Margaret gave it to him. It was on Meridian Avenue, in a neighborhood 3 miles from our mother's house. We drove to the address the same afternoon, all four of us in Gregory's car, which had never happened before and had a specific strange quality: the four of us adults in a car, like we were children being taken somewhere, not speaking much, Gregory driving, the address in his phone's navigation. The Meridian House Foundation operated out of a Victorian house on a residential street, a well-maintained 3-story building with a small sign near the front door that was visible once you knew what you were looking at. The sign listed the organization's name, and below it a line that described its mission in brief: residential support and transitional services for women and children leaving domestic violence situations. We stood on the sidewalk looking at the building for a moment. Then Gregory walked up the front steps and rang the bell. A woman answered. She was in her 50s, professional, with the specific warm directness of someone who works in care services and has learned to read a situation quickly. Gregory explained who we were and why we were there. She said her name was Sandra, and she was the organization's director. She said our mother had told her we might come. That sentence reorganized the afternoon. Sandra brought us inside. The house was warm and organized with the specific purposeful calm of an institutional space that is doing real work. She brought us to a small meeting room and sat across from us and said, "Your mother has been involved with this organization for a long time." I said, "How long?" She said, 34 years. We sat with that number for a moment. 34 years. Our mother had been involved with an organization that none of us had heard of for 34 years. Gregory asked, how was she involved? Sandra said, financially, consistently, every year since 1991, a regular contribution that had increased as her circumstances allowed. She said our mother had also been a volunteer in the early years, before the demands of teaching and raising 4 children had made volunteering less feasible. She said in recent years she contributed primarily financially and occasionally by phone. She said, "We We knew her well. I said, what was her connection? I mean, why this organization specifically? Sandra looked at us for a moment. Then she said, I think that is something you should understand from the documentation. She said, there is a file your mother left here, intended for your family. She had asked that we give it to you when you came. She stood. She said she would get it. While Sandra was out of the room, we looked at each other in the conference room of a Victorian house 3 miles from our mother's house, and nobody said anything because nobody had words for what was currently happening. The file Sandra brought back was a manila envelope sealed with tape and labeled in our mother's handwriting. It said, "For my children, when you find this." I want to tell you what was in the file, rather than building toward it dramatically, because the building is not the point. The truth is the point. Inside the file were 3 documents: a personal letter addressed to all 4 of us, a set of photographs, and a single page from a legal document dated 1989. The 1989 document was a protective order filed in Henrico County, Virginia. The petitioner was listed as Patricia Marie Ellison, which was our mother's maiden name before she married our father. The respondent was a name none of us recognized. The order described a pattern of abuse and requested protective separation. Our mother had been in an abusive relationship before she married our father, before any of us existed. She had filed for a protective order in 1989 at the age of 23. That was what 1989 was. That was the year nobody in our family talked about because nobody in our family had known it existed. The photographs were from that period. Our mother at 23 in photographs we had never seen, looking different from the woman we knew in the specific way that people look different in photographs from before their children knew them, young and uncertain in some of them. In the last one, standing outside what appeared to be a shelter, she was looking at the camera with an expression that was the beginning of something rather than the continuation of something. The letter was 4 pages. She had written it the previous spring while she was still well, apparently anticipating her illness might progress and wanting to ensure the file would be found. She wrote about the relationship and the protective order and the shelter where she had stayed for 6 weeks in 1989. She described the women she had met there and the staff who had helped her, and the specific moment when she had understood that the life she had been living was not the life she was required to keep living. She described leaving. She described meeting our father 2 years later and building the life we had grown up in. She wrote that she had begun giving money to the Meridian House Foundation the year after it was founded because she had benefited from an organization exactly like it and had believed from that first year that making it possible for other women to benefit was the most honest use of the money she was able to spare. She wrote, I did not tell you because the story belonged to me at a time when you did not yet exist, and I made peace with it in my own way and built the life you knew me for, and I did not believe telling you would add anything to your understanding of me. I believe I may have been wrong about that. This letter is my attempt to correct the mistake. We sat in the conference room of the Meridian House Foundation for a long time after Gregory finished reading the letter aloud. He had read it because he was the oldest, and because reading things aloud was his version of being present in difficult moments, the practical action substituting for the emotional one. Beth was crying quietly, which was characteristic of Beth, who processes things through immediate feeling rather than through the managed composure the rest of us had learned from our mother. Marcus was looking at the photographs. I was looking at the 1989 legal document, the protective order with our mother's maiden name at the top. Sandra came back at some point and brought water. She sat with us briefly and said she was one of the people who made this place possible. She said the foundation had been operating for 34 years, and our mother's contributions had been consistent for every one of those years, and that in her final few years, as the retirement account grew, the contributions had become significant enough that they had funded specific programs that would not otherwise have existed. She said, your mother told me once that she gave because she understood what it meant to have somewhere to go. She said she wanted to make sure there was always somewhere to go. I asked Sandra about the founding of the organization. Sandra said it had been founded in 1989 by a woman who had herself benefited from shelter services and who had decided to build something similar in Richmond. She said our mother had found the foundation in its first year, 1991, through a referral from the shelter where she had stayed in 1989. Gregory asked the question I had been forming. He said, did our mother ever talk about us? Sandra said yes, often, across the years she had known her. She said Patricia described her children with the specific pride of someone who considered her children the clearest evidence that her life had produced something good and lasting. She said she talked about all 4 of
of you. She said she wanted the life she built after 1989 to be what you remembered. She said she wanted the other thing to be hers. I thought about that for a long time during the drive home. Our mother had carried a story for 40 years that shaped everything about the life she built. The careful woman, the consistent woman, the woman who stayed in the house after our father died because home was important and stability was important, and the specific quality of a life built on solid ground was something she understood in a way we had not fully understood she understood. She had understood it because she had once not had it and had had to find it from scratch at 23 with a protective order and a shelter and 6 weeks of beginning again.
We contested nothing. I want to be clear about that because it is the part that matters for understanding who my siblings and I are and who our mother taught us to be. Gregory had been managing her finances and had known the estate's approximate value and had expected to inherit a portion of it, and did not. Marcus and Beth had traveled from out of state for a reading that produced nothing for any of us. I had been her caregiver for the final months and had given significant time and energy to that period of her life. None of us contested the will. We talked about it explicitly, the four of us, in Gregory's car on the way back to the house that now belonged to the Meridian House Foundation. Gregory said, "I want to make sure we talked about this." I said, "Yes." He said, "Does anyone want to contest it?" Marcus said no immediately. Beth said she would not. I said, "Of course not." Gregory said, "Good." He said, "I just wanted to make sure we said it out loud." I said, "She knew what she was doing." He said, "Yes." I said, "She knew what she was doing when she started giving in 1991, and she knew what she was doing when she wrote the will, and she knew what she was doing when she left the file at Sandra's office for us to find. She planned all of it." Gregory said, "She planned everything." He said it with the specific, exhausted warmth of someone who has just discovered that their mother was considerably more organized and intentional than they had understood. The house sold through the foundation's management within 3 months. The proceeds went to programs. The retirement and investment accounts transferred within 60 days. The personal property was mostly donated, some kept by us for the things that had specific meaning, the photographs from after 1989, the things she had accumulated in the life we had known. I kept her recipe box and a quilt she had made. Gregory kept her desk. Marcus kept her garden tools. Beth kept the specific set of books from her bedroom that she had read across her entire life. We went back to the foundation on the 6th-month anniversary of her death, all four of us, which required coordination and intention and was the most organized we had been as siblings since childhood. Sandra showed us the programs that had been expanded using our mother's estate, a residential unit that had been refurbished, a counseling program that had added a position. She showed us a small plaque they had installed in the main hallway of the house. It said, "In honor of Patricia Vance, who understood what it means to have somewhere to go, and who spent 34 years making sure others would." I stood in the hallway of the Victorian house on Meridian Avenue, and I read my mother's name on the plaque, and I understood completely and finally who she had been underneath the person I had known. She had been someone who had needed help once and had never forgotten what that felt like, and had spent every year after that making sure the help existed for someone else. That was my mother. That was all of it. Drop your city in the comments. Hit subscribe. I will see you in the next one.